I'm recording there. I am recording here. All right, here's the sync point.
So when did you start with this atheism kick that you're on?
I became an atheist, I remember at 10 years old. I just remember, I was raised Jewish and I never really connected with my religion or just enjoyed practicing it very much. And then somebody just told me for the first time what atheism was. I went to a religious school and I was like, oh, that makes sense. I understand things now. And then, of course, so I went on from there to, when I was a teenager, reading Sam Harris and Richard Dawkins and people like that.
What era was this?
So that was, mid-2000s.
Okay.
I started high school in 2006, so that would have been like peak, new atheist era.
Yeah.
So I did that then, but I was never like involved in organized atheism or anything. I did, however, get involved in organized libertarianism, when I got out of college, and I work in that sort of ideas and like think tank sphere professionally. I work at the Foundation Against Intolerance and Racism, which is not necessarily a libertarian organization per se, but is definitely a very libertarian-friendly organization.
Yeah.
And that sort of, but being in that space, I got involved with a group called Atheists for Liberty, which is a group for, more right-leaning atheists. And so that sort of, they made me the state director for Virginia. And so I just kind of wanted to help out and start talking about it a little bit more.
Yeah, okay. Liberty, right. You said the word right.
Yes.
On the right. What does that mean to you or among your clan of organized libertarian atheists?
So, I think the terms right and left are very just sort of broadly used to describe like kind of tribal leanings, people that generally correlate together on a broad set of issues. However, I think a more formal definition I've heard of the terms that I found very, very useful and clarifying in my thinking was that it relates to hierarchy versus equality. So the left places as its focus, more stress on making people equal, that people are naturally very equal, and that political institutions should always be striving to make them more equal. I think nobody is completely right or left wing, so obviously, I would hope, obviously, I agree with parts of that. As where the right, broadly thinks that hierarchies are natural, and at least in some instances, good. So there are multiple philosophies that can be right wing in that framework, right? I am absolutely not by any sense like a fascist or a monarchist, for example, which would be in favor of certain hierarchies, but I'm a libertarian. And, I believe in capitalism. I believe that people have different natural sets of abilities, and that, through the marketplace and through the expression of people's abilities, you have different outcomes, and that's natural and good, and that a rising tide lifts all boats, when you have different outcomes, rather than trying to equalize outcomes and, lowering everybody's, total wealth.
Yeah, yeah. One weakness that I perceive in both libertarianism and atheism is that is the cohesion, or how the hierarchies cohere to themselves. The thing about more formal structures, and including political structures and religious structures, they cohere people in mass, right? Mm-hmm. And libertarians and atheisms, from what I've noticed, they're very intelligent, on probably like really high up in the intelligence sphere, and they're very self-directed, and they're kind of liberal in the sense that it makes sense for them to live in a world of rational agents, and they can perceive that rational agent kind of emergence into something greater or lesser, breaking apart, coming together, a lot of contract work, a lot of consent. It works in the mind of the intelligent people who can navigate and benefit from that landscape. But it falls apart when you're trying to deal with people who are stupider and, or less intelligent, or other kinds of family structures that need to have, authority as the basis rather than consent as the basis. So I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that, and how you've seen over the years these groups of atheists, these groups of libertarians come together, form hierarchies, and either weather the storm of stress or break apart under certain stresses.
Yes. So, I would certainly say for libertarianism, we haven't seen a, perfectly libertarian society come into existence except for David Friedman, Milton Friedman's son, who's done some historical research, has looked at a case of a couple 100-year period in medieval Iceland, which is rather interesting. But for the most part, we don't really see that yet. However, we have seen increasingly more libertarian over time governments arise. I would say the United States is a drastically more libertarian government than anything that arose before it. I would say Switzerland is a particularly libertarian government, which has been very successful, but it's not all the way. I'm somebody who really believes in all the way. I subscribe to the philosophy of anarcho-capitalism, as described by Murray Rothbard and also by David Friedman, in a slightly different way. We haven't really seen anything like that, except for maybe that period in medieval Iceland. But I don't think that necessarily means it's not possible or something to aspire to. I think that for the most part, anybody that kind of has political goals is aspiring to something that hasn't been completely executed yet. Because if it were, they would, maybe just go live there. For atheism, how has that cohered communities? There have been, I think, societies historically that didn't necessarily practice religion in the exact same way that we practice it today. Pagan societies, if you look at the Greeks and Romans, before Christianity took over, Rome, that was, I'm not a super expert on it, but I think a society more where people had like personal gods and personal practices, but in a way where those beliefs weren't necessarily cohering like a authoritarian system in the same way that Abrahamic religions have been used for. And those societies cohered for immense, periods of time. But, to your bigger point, I do think I differ from certain libertarians, or the stereotype of libertarians. What's
the stereotype of libertarian?
So I think the stereotype as libertarians is just, I exist for myself, and, I am going to go live in the woods, without a community, and, I don't need other people or anything like that. That's the real extreme stereotype. Nobody believes that, basically, that I'm aware of. But in the sense,
is it? There's like a meme, like guns, weed, and one other thing, kind of thing. Guns, money, weed, something like that.
Maybe prostitution. I feel like would fit that sort of like devil's triangle. Yes. No, I'm for legalizing all those. To be clear, I certainly I'm not a gun owner presently, but I strongly believe in that, and I would like to be in the near future. But your broader point, I think, was about like needing sort of more structured systems that cohere people, and I
cohere people across various different skill sets.
Yes,
and abilities. Right?
Yes, I do think capitalism sort of, if you mean skill sets specifically to get things done, the incentive structure of capitalism really does that. But that's purely in the economic realm. And so I don't want to oversell that, like, all of society and all of human relations should be run, purely off of capitalism. I am very inspired by Ayn Rand, who I have a book in my background there. And so I do believe in self-interest and rational self-interest, and that forming the backbone of capitalism. But that's different than sort of like monetary relations, and that sort of incentive structure defining everything that we should do. But I do believe that, something that, I think you're trying to get at, which religion does very well and Abrahamic religions have done very well, is form community. And that sort of just like we're all isolated individuals in the woods. I mean, that's not what I believe. I just, on the libertarian side, I don't want that sense of community to come from the state. And on the atheist side, I don't want that sense of bringing together into community to come from demonstrably false beliefs. I think we're in a time where we're dealing with a lot of artifacts of history. And so I understand why in centuries prior, when modern science wasn't as developed as it was now, it was easier to believe, certain claims of facts that were made in religious texts. But now I think that's become a lot harder for people, and we're seeing rising rates of atheism or general non-religiousness in society. And so I think a big part of what my argument was that led to this conversation today is that, well, this sort of, our society is breaking down, right? It's getting conquered by wokeness. It's getting conquered by all these things that are breaking down like a functioning community. And we really need some sort of ideological vehicle for exactly the purpose you're talking about. But the ones that we've had historically, those Abrahamic religions in the West, they're not working anymore. We see that in the data that they're not working anymore. I think we can just kind of feel it, that like society is becoming less religious.
Could you expound on that? How are they not working anymore? In what way are they not working anymore? I mean, the Amish, have you seen their birth rate?
Yes. Okay, so I understand what you're saying. Yeah, so for people that, really believe them still, of which there are obviously enormous numbers still, the majority of people are still religious at this point in time. And particularly in very strict communities like that, I'm more familiar. I was raised Jewish, right? I know the ultra-Orthodox community very well, which has a lot of
the Hasidim?
Yeah. I mean, my grandmother grew up in a community in Scranton, Pennsylvania, or not grew up, but lived, and I would go and visit her in a community where those were all the neighbors. And she wasn't, my family is more modern Orthodox than ultra-Orthodox, but I've been around, I've spent a fair bit of time around those communities.
What was the, if you can recall, and I know you were kind of younger, but what was the feeling of that those communities, like being amidst that sense of belonging, a high trust society, or something else? Like, how did they cohere?
I found it extremely negative.
Negative, and, repressive negative, or
and multifaceted negative. Okay. So I can't speak to the Amish. I've never met an Amish person. For the ultra-Orthodox Jewish community, I can speak to. I think I've spent enough time around them. So first of all, there are certain subgroups of ultra-Orthodox Jews who I think are very spiritual. There's this Chabad movement that I can just sort of, you tell when you're interacting with them that they feel connected to something bigger. But for other groups, which form most of, ultra-Orthodox Jewish movements, I have not witnessed that. What I've witnessed instead is people that are living within a very, very strict set of rules that has been imparted upon them, that they must participate in this by their parents, by the community around them, and that imparts really severe psychological stress to keep up with all these extremely detailed and difficult to follow rules. I mean, many of them are overlapped with the modern Orthodox rules, which I grew up in, but they take it even further. You can't mix two threads within a type of clothes, and so you have to buy very specific clothing. I'm sure you're familiar with the general rules of kashrut. You have to keep your kitchen in a certain way. You need separate sets of plates. You can't touch people of the opposite sex, even to like shake hands or things like that. The Shabbat starts at a very specific time, and ends, correlated to the sunset and a certain amount of stars being
and
out.
Then people get into legalistic
times,
battles whether or not it's work to turn on a light switch or not.
Yes,
that
drives so much cognitive process of those individuals, during every moment of the day. I mean, that life to me seemed absolutely miserable. Even the extent to which I had to participate in as a modern Orthodox person was absolutely miserable. But to do it at the extent of the ultra-Orthodox, I mean, these do not seem like happy people to me. Okay. They've never seemed like happy people except for a small subset in the Chabad movement who have a very different attitude, I've noticed. Okay. And it's repressive in other ways. I mean, in terms of trust, yeah, they do have generally, extremely high rates of trust within the community. I think that's good. But, especially in a multicultural society like this one, and I think we could talk about maybe how multicultural it really should be or like optimally is. But they have to get along with other groups. I would overhear a lot of active racism, against other groups that were, in the immediate vicinity of their community. Extremely low rates of trust to sort of any neighboring group. So, I didn't find that beneficial, but watching it. But what I do believe is that it has a very strong pull to people because people are raised in a way where leaving it imparts really high degrees of psychological stress as well as often physical difficulty. In the ultra-Orthodox communities, even that exist in America, there's people raised in those communities who don't speak English. And their schools really don't meet like basic standards of teaching secular subjects. If they want to go on and leave that community, well, they lose their families, they lose everybody in those communities, and they've been given none of the skills to succeed in modern society. So I look really negatively upon that community. But I do see what you're saying, that, within it, there are certain things I think you're right about, which is that high trust is important. That sense of bringing people together around a shared understanding about certain things is really important. But what I think we have to do, as we're seeing, when I say it's failing in current times, we could talk about it failing in those... Oh, but I have a light in the background and everything, so that's no good. Okay. So, I'm so sorry. So where did we leave off? What was I talking about?
Well, what I don't understand, or what I would like clarification on, is you say that it's not working anymore. Religion's not working anymore. How is it not working anymore?
So, I mean, in terms of the groups that you were talking about previously, I mean, it is working to cohere groups. Of those that, still believe it. I think that comes with a number of side effects in the most religious communities, as I was talking about in ultra-Orthodox Jewish communities. But what I meant more by it's not working anymore is just less and less people are in that. I mean, they have high birth rates. So, I mean, if their ideology is really strong enough that like the kids won't leave the community and will stay in it, I mean, I guess if you draw that out, like, 1,000 years down the line, they can get some more demographic dominance again. But, overall, what you see in our society and throughout the West and throughout most of the world, is increasing rates of irreligiousness and declining rates of religiousness, and you're seeing that based on the kids of religious people not staying in those traditions anymore because for one reason or another, they're not finding it convincing or compelling to stay in. So as a solution for broader society rather than certain small communities, that's what I mean when I say it's not working anymore. We are seeing ourselves face a increasingly less religious society.
And that's good?
It's mixed. So it can be good, I think. But right now, in part because there is not enough right-wing atheism, which is what, I'm advocating we need more of.
Okay.
I think what we're seeing is the people that happen to be atheist, rather than it being a problem with atheism, but the people who happen to be atheist are, overwhelmingly woke, overwhelmingly progressive, overwhelmingly left-wing. And I don't think that's particularly surprising, but it's not, I don't think it's a result of atheism. I don't think it's surprising because, progressivism generally is, opposed to conservatism, and that conservatism psychologically is a hesitancy towards change and, just being kind of a little bit afraid of new things, which can be very healthy, to be clear. As where progressivism doesn't necessarily have that same psychological block. So insofar as, wokeness and progressive ideas are major societal changes and atheism is a major societal change, you would sort of expect that a lot of the same people might adopt both. But I think that that's kind of a artifact of our particular historical time, because both of those changes are happening right now, rather than anything inherent in atheism leading to a more woke, more problematic society. Again, I'm a big fan of Ayn Rand, who I don't necessarily think has all the answers, but I think has many. And Rand is a right-wing atheist who built a whatever size, right-wing, atheist movement. And so, my opinion is that we need more of that. I don't necessarily think objectivism, her philosophy, is going to be the philosophy that coheres and creates, a big societal, movement that's taking over. But I do think that things sort of building on that, taking certain ideas from that, just generally sort of trying to reconstruct a lot of the values that have made the West successful, but along lines that don't require blind faith, is sort of the path forward to build something
just
that...
blind studies, double-blind studies, no blind faith. Is that what you're advocating for?
Yeah, yeah. That's a great way to phrase it. Yes, I think so.
What is atheism if not the lack of something? Is it? Sometimes you speak about it as though it is a thing. Is it a thing, or is it the lack of a thing?
It's the lack of a thing.
Okay.
Yeah, it's the lack of blind faith, specifically in a deity. Okay. But I'm perhaps using it a little loosely, more loosely, to mean just the lack of blind faith in general.
Okay.
Religious blind faith.
So, with regard to human beings as psychological entities with different proclivities, let's just say neuroticism. Mm-hmm. How does atheism help society's neuroticism? You brought up the Orthodox community. It seems high in neuroticism, and even like it amplifies neuroticism. I'm sure there's other religions that tackle neuroticism itself, direct it in a certain way. Atheism doesn't have the tools to offer society. So when society is faced by troublesome death or troublesome a moral reckoning, if we just look at 2020, to what degree did atheism, rationalism, let's say, assist us in believing or not believing or disbelieving the science or the historical moment that we must participate in? Those were acts of faith. Those were leaps of faith that were based on fear responses. They're not based on rational things. Rationality went out the window during that year. Very explicitly.
Yes, but in a way slightly different than I think traditional religions, which I think is important. So to your first point, atheism is the lack of something. So you're right. Atheism alone cannot, and nobody should expect it to, fulfill all the functions that religion did for society in a way that I agree are significant and need filling. But again, I think can be filled in a way that doesn't require blind faith in a DT or whatever else. So what I'm arguing is sort of that needs to be reconstructed. Those functions need to be reconstructed because the old vehicle for them isn't doing it. But in terms of, I agree and have written that wokeness is a religion. John McWhorter, others have argued that, at length. I agree with you that a lot of the trust the science, which is not real science, but just the science, some like almost supernatural concept of it, was done sort of in faith-like ways, if not exactly faith, which you might be right about. But it's different. So I think understanding the truth of reality is very, very difficult. Nobody is perfectly rational. If it's possible, somebody could be. Ayn Rand would certainly argue that they could be. I'm not sure if she's right about that. But regardless if they can be or not, they're almost universally not. And when you can't be perfectly rational, you're trying to be rational. You're trying to do the things that you in your head, as you're turning those cognitive gears, that you think make sense, that you think are right, but you're gonna get it wrong sometimes. And so with the trust the science sort of stuff that you're talking about, I think that was people trying to be rational and failing, but they didn't catch themselves having faith. I don't think they caught themselves, I'm turning myself over to something else, and I am just going to trust that without any kind of rational evaluation. I mean, they did defer to experts, but they deferred to experts that they felt that they could trust because of a certain set of rational criteria that they had to have. No one person can do all the thinking in the world. As where, with religions, given where modern science is at, it's much, much harder to take all of those things, all of the claims of fact that are made in, historical religious texts, and say, I am truly being rational and, doing my best job to understand the truth of the world by, adopting this text which says, the earth is only 6,000 years old, or whatever it may be. And so I think it's harder in today's society for people to convince themselves that they're being rational while adopting those faiths. As whereas you can convince yourself that you're being rational, adopting wokeness or adopting, trust the science. And we need to at least be able to convince people that they're being rational, believing what we're asking them to believe. And ideally, we should be trying very hard to actually be rational and be correct, while doing it, not doing that cynically. But it's a hard thing. And I do think the success of wokeness, the success of trust the science, is because people can believe that they're being rational while believing those, because they don't make the same debunked claims.
If I don't want to use a tired analogy, but to what degree are you willing to stake your life on this thing that you called rationality? Like, is that sufficient for the entirety of your life, or is it a tool for specific jobs? Does it have an extent, or is it alone able to organize the good life, the true life, and the beautiful life?
I think I need you to define a little bit further, like, stake my life on it. Like,
yeah.
To to be rational implies to be rational from premises, and premises, can be rationally understood and rationally perceived. But, if there's certain things about like my psychology and stuff, or just like the facts of existence, I have to take them from acts of perception and then use rationality as a tool to derive down from that.
And then to calculate action based on
calculate action. Yeah. And you do also want to use rationality to make sure that your perceptions are correct, right? Because a lot of people can have incorrect intuitions about things. And, if you really check those and question those, that's really important. So rationality does play a role in selecting the premises. I'm not saying that you can just like entirely choose whatever premises you want. And that's what sort of Christian apologetics is, where it's saying, we're taking a premise, on faith that God exists, and then we're going to use all this rationality to try and defend it. But we don't ever like look at the premise with those same standards. So we do need to do that.
Statement like God
rationality
exists,
alone, you can't. You need other things to combine with rationality. Yeah.
So, so a statement like God exists, and then a series of theological arguments around that, deriving that, can be more or less successful insofar as it helps you to calculate action, beneficial action. There's still some sort of telos, or some sort of, what the good is that I'm going to be good, not evil, basically. And if God exists, God is good. What is God? And then you go through and you have scriptures, and there's a variety of different. There's a hierarchy of good and bad theology, and something like the Catholic Church is in great harmony with science, and is able to separate these statements of faith from statements of fact, right? And then derive moral content from action by looking at faith, looking at scripture, and then deriving truth claims by looking at matter. But the way that we view matter is different than the way we view our own psychology, and different than we view some sort of transcendental claim. And rationality would just be kind of a handmaiden of faith in any given direction. And by faith, I mean, you don't just look at the world to see the world, you look at the world to do something in the world, to make something in the world, and to make yourself in the world, and to find some sort of homeostasis, to find pleasure, to find a good family, whatever those values are, plug into that, and rationality helps you to do that. So this is another big question, going from how do we deal with societal neuroticism on a massive scale without some sort of structure of belief and some sort of really strenuous value set that keeps that in check, like in 2020, when it went from panic over the COVID epidemic to panic over Black Lives Mattering or not mattering, or whatever that was. It was the same frequency. It was just applied to these different kind of domains. And the wheels had come off. There was no mitigating principles that was calming people down. There was no religion there. There was no practice that would calm people down, that would put people in a state of peace amidst the terror. Right, and I don't see how atheism can offer that. So if atheism can't offer that, you need to offer that somehow.
Yes.
And ultimately, you're going to have to tell a story. I think this is my claim about religion: is that they're narrative tools that make sense of human beings as narrative creatures, and with a past, a present, a future, and some sort of action. Right. So,
I completely agree with you, except for your early on description of Catholicism. I think that's how they understand themselves. I don't necessarily agree with their understanding of themselves.
I'm not a Catholic, but I can hear them in my head saying, "Well, we're more smarter than he's giving us credit for." So
no, I know. I'll talk to a Catholic about that. But but the rest of what you said, I mean, I just think completely correct. I think narrative is really important. I am trained as a filmmaker. I understand the importance of storytelling in terms of getting ideas through to people in a way that mere just argumentation, a conversation like this just can't do. I understand and completely agree with that need for sort of a deeper meaning or purpose to pacify people in moments of neuroticism and stress and existential questioning. I basically agree with everything you're saying about the purpose of religion. I'm just saying that, ones from a very, very long time ago that made certain claims of fact, which, I am an atheist towards those claims of fact, are proving themselves through societal demographics, through just, I think, sort of what we just see when we go out into the world and see a less religious world. Even people that still identify with religion are sort of less religious generally.
Yeah.
It's
that
not
good?
working.
That's the question.
It's
is
not,
that good?
No, it's bad, man. It's bad. And that's exactly why I'm arguing we need to reconstruct something that can do that is compatible with modern times and a modern understanding of the world. And I think that there are ways to do that. I mean, I guess I would take it as like a basic, claim of humanity, that if there are reasons we developed those sorts of tools that are helpful to us, then there are factual reasons why those tools are helpful to us. And we can just kind of understand those and use those. I mean, I think we are seeing today certain spiritual movements arise that I advocate for. They're not doing everything in terms of replacing the functions of religion, but they're doing part of it. I think that's sort of pacifying in spiritual connection sense. I think you're seeing mindfulness, right? I mean, Sam Harris, one of the biggest, new atheists, has a meditation app, and is taking all of these teachings from Buddhist traditions, but, secularizing them and updating them. And, I think that's good. I also think we're seeing psychedelics do a lot of that. And I really advocate for that and that sort of direct spiritual experience that psychedelics can make possible for people that just reading a religious text or something like that can't do for many, many people. I think psychedelics are a very powerful spiritual technology.
Well, they're also a very powerful psyop too.
Right? Oh, okay. Tell me about this. I'm interested. Why are they a psyop?
They could be used. If you're looking at like direct spiritual experience, you're looking again like an atomized field. You're looking at a bunch of people tripping. Let's just say with mushrooms, you have 20 people tripping on mushrooms. To what degree is that shared hallucination shared, and to what degree is it individual, and then to what degree does that stabilize into a good community? Like there has to be some sort of orchestration, and again this creepy thing called authority comes up. Somebody will centralize and say this is what this means, this is what that means, and then everybody gets on the same page because there's an authority there, right? So it could be used, MK Ultra style. I mean, some people, I don't know if you know the Evergreen story, but some people were saying that there's probably some sort of psyop going on over there, and like there's this, the president during that unrest, he did work for the deep state at some point, so like there's just like kind of rumors and stuff. But rumors aside, like there is potential for great manipulation in these psychedelic things, and because they're not going to be based on a clean, rational, scientific worldview, they're based on the opposite. And going in that direction, what do you come up with? And then and then in times of stress, how do you get along with people without society going mad by taking a bunch of mushrooms when the next pandemic hit, or so-called plandemic hits, right?
Well, listen, I mean, if you want to argue that, spiritual beliefs can lead to great degrees of irrationalism, you'll find no greater person who agrees with you than that. Yeah. And, let's look at ISIS, let's look at the Crusades. I mean, let's look at all sorts of times that, spiritual beliefs have been used to make people do horrible things. And we can certainly find that in recent history with psychedelics as well. I think the pseudo-religion that Timothy Leary, tried to construct, based on psychedelics was really not the right one. Again, this is one function of religion that I think can be better constructed in a new way, which is that sort of direct experience with spiritual contact. That sort of, I do think psychedelics can help provide a direct perceptual look into what reality is in a certain sense, and how we connect, and that our connection to reality doesn't necessarily have to always look like what it does while sober-minded. But it's people can use that to get people to do all sorts of horrible things. So you do have to have people that can
decide what's good and bad. Let's just say this is haram. Like, you can't go around raping farm animals. That's wrong. Why?
Yeah,
it's a statement of faith. We're going to kill you if you do it.
Psychedelics don't provide a ton of cognitive knowledge, so they're not going to reconstruct a lot of the things that I'm arguing that, like, rationality and reason is needed for, right? We're going to need to derive systems where people in society can treat each other well along a certain code, and the psychedelics aren't going to do that. What psychedelics are going to do, and are already doing, is provide people with that sense of calm and comfort in stressful and neurotic times.
Okay. So here's another difficulty for me squaring what I'm trying to perceive you're saying, is that there's something fundamentally about right wing that accepts and embraces tradition, and will, of course, provide greater or lesser degrees of rationality around the systems of tradition. Right? It distrusts the more leftist, progressive worldview of being able to create a system, whole cloth, via rationality. So you say this, it sounds like you want something right wing and yet constructed, like socially constructed, which I perceive as the left wing project. So I'm just wondering, what is it about your system or what you want that is right wing if you take away tradition, or if you cast aspersions on tradition? Can it still be right wing?
I think hierarchy, and I think a lot of traditional values. So, certainly in reaction to wokeness.
And those things are justified through detailed argument rather than through claims.
Yes, rather than we derive this value from the Bible because God said so, and then that translates down to modern political values. No, I don't believe in that. I think Ayn Rand offers a lot of very good argumentation.
Specifically, what would Rand say about authority? Who gets to decide? Who gets to say, because I said so? Because
authority is such a big question, in the same sense that hierarchy is such a big question, right?
Okay.
So, like, what would Rand say about authority? I mean, there's all sorts of authorities that she would be like deeply in favor of. The authority of expertise, of people that have earned their position through skill and
what happens when the systems of expertise collapse back to
it's a disaster,
right?
It's bad, but a lot of that is maintained through a different kind of authority, which is the use of physical force. What would Rand say about that kind of authority? I mean, Rand would be, horribly, horribly against that, as would, she didn't identify as a libertarian, but I do, and, as would any libertarian.
Okay. There's one, Carl Benjamin Sargon of Akkad, he brought up a good point in a stream that I was listening to him, and it was like he was kind of selling or upselling his tradition, his ethnicity. He's British, so he was talking about colonialism and how anti-corruption, there was some sort of value within the British way of doing things that was very anti-corruption. And I'm wondering, if we do build these systems of order, wholesale, like one fundamental thing that would be nice to install in there would be a sense of anti-corruption. And I'm wondering how you would instill that value into a populace of elites without some sort of moral kind of dictate, like don't do that. It's ultimately like bad people do that. If you do that everything goes to hell? Like if you're corrupt, how do you dissuade people from being corrupt without some sort of moral order? And I know like fairy tale God in the sky going to hell or whatever.
I'm not arguing against a moral order. I believe in a need for moral order.
Yeah. So how do we promulgate moral order outside of the narrative, the religious narratives and the backing of tradition?
I'm not arguing against narratives. I'm also not arguing against the backing of tradition. So insofar, another, I know I'm defining right wing in a certain way about hierarchy
and values.
But I would also, I think it's also very clear that the right is at least associated heavily with tradition, and I'm not even really arguing against tradition. I'm arguing in favor of tradition. I'm arguing that the historical religions have so much and have offered so much to society that we need to maintain, and that at a broad societal level, they're not functioning in the same way that they used to maintain. I think there's so much about the family structure.
Are they not functioning, or are people just not following them? That's two different things. If people aren't following, it doesn't mean they're not functioning.
I believe that's the same thing. If they're unable to get people to follow them, then they're not functioning. Part of their function is to be able to self-replicate. And, they've self-replicated in ways that are often harmful. So I don't think self-replication alone is enough. But a positive self-replication is getting people to choose them, getting people to realize why this is valuable to them and adopt religion. I think the most passionate and usually compelling religious people are people that came to their religion converts, rather than people that it was, indoctrinated into them in childhood. But, right now I don't think we're seeing, nonetheless, however it does it, self-replication is a basic function that a religion needs to accomplish in order to do all of the things that you're talking about. So if in modern times religion can't self-replicate, then it can't function.
Okay. But the core value, so it seems like you want to look at tradition and save the parts that are good, whatever that means, and then get rid of the parts that are inefficient or bad or don't fit anymore, or no longer modern. One where you said you want to get rid of the horse and buggy, and you want to update tradition. The question is, if you tug apart the core of religion, which would be the belief in a transcendental God, does it still do all those other things that were in it cohere at all without that? If you tug that thread, which thread can you pull, and then without it all unspooling?
Well, I mean, if it can't, then we're truly lost, because it's not working. So I think one of the problems here is, I think you're arguing why it would be good if religion, worked, if it was successfully self-replicating in present times, but it isn't, and I think it isn't for certain reasons that we're not going backwards on. We're not going backwards in a certain more scientific understanding of the world, and so if we want to retain as much of these positive things from religion as we can, it needs an updated vehicle, or we just lose no matter what. That's kind of my viewing of it. I also don't think it's good. I mean, I don't think it would be good for people to believe things that they know are false for sort of the ends. I think that's inherently unstable. I mean, I think we're seeing it.
How do they know what's false? What that God exists? How does one know that that's true or false?
So I don't think, I'm a little bit more sympathetic to broad deists, where it's there's some sort of higher power, but we don't really know what it is. I frankly, I could be converted to some form of deism. I'm not. I would say I'm technically agnostic in that sense, even though it affects my thinking very little. So I think I'm better, more accurately described as an atheist. But in terms of the concrete religions that people practice, I mean, they make many claims of fact that we just know enough about the world to know that those aren't true. I mean, we know evolution happened. We know the world is not 6,000 years old. I've seen, and then there's things where it's just, there's such specific claims where, the only evidence is that this was said in a book. Like, I was watching a video the other day of somebody arguing, why Noah's Ark was possible, and therefore, you should believe this. Like, well, technically, like, if you built a boat of this size and you were only save these kind of animals and stuff like that. Yeah. But it's like, okay, like you can do that, but that's not really a good reason to like believe in it. Like, there's no positive evidence for that. So, I think the specific claims of specific religions have just totally fallen apart in modern times, where we have a more detailed understanding of history and of the natural sciences and everything.
Okay, but history and natural sciences, they don't tell you what a man is. They don't tell you what a man should be, what a man can be. Like, there's just what a man was. There's just evidence of different things that happened or do happen.
What do you mean science doesn't tell us what a man is? What is a woman, Benjamin?
If religion, and I go around and I find a religion that I vibe with, it's got a nice ceremony, the truth claims aren't too offensive to my sense of rationality, there's community there, and then it inspires me to be a better person. Mm-hmm. For whatever reason, it says pornography is terrible for your soul, and you need to let that go. And I believe that. I take that leap of faith, whether or not that's terrible for my soul, whether or not I don't have a soul. Like, it turns out later on down the road that I have a much more fulfilling relationship with my wife, and I end up to have a couple more kids that I wouldn't have, because I wouldn't be wasting my energies on this. But the downstreams of effect of the belief are not necessarily not good or not true, because the starting claim is beyond my comprehension, that I have a soul and that God exists. Like, those are beyond my comprehension. But because that religion that I ascribe to derives from those very principal acts of belief that are greater than me, that belief in the greater than me actually gives me strength to accomplish something in my life that was a stumbling block. Let's just say, like, I got addicted to pornography, and like, believing in a higher power saved me from that. Believing in time saved me from that. Believing in something that's greater than me, like unlock the future to me. So there can be bad belief. There will be people who are poor readers who use belief in the wrong way. But I'm just, I guess one of my questions is, what happens to society if we just say that belief in and of itself is a fiction, or something that we need to submit to rationality? Like it's just a dangerous proposition. You have a lot of bad things that happen from that.
Yeah. So listen, I mean, I think
communism.
Again, I just want to be century. Like, agree completely. I just want to be super clear.
Yeah.
I'm not necessarily, the core of my argument is not necessarily that like we should just throw religion in the trash.
Okay.
My argument is that religion is declining in modern times, and this is a fact that we have to deal with.
Okay.
And so given that...
Why do you think it's declining then?
I think that it's declining. I think it's multifactorial, but I think that one key factor in it is that it is harder to believe when you have to accept more and more claims of faith in order to believe it. In terms of what you're saying about, you had this faith, it told you something about pornography that benefited your relationship. These are exactly the sort of things that I'm arguing we need to protect and maintain in religion. And that if we don't undergo this project of trying to defend these types of values on more secular grounding, and that being sort of our primary advocacy vehicle for them when trying to persuade, then we're just not going to win on that fight at all. And then we're going to end up in this really bad world where people are really negatively affected by those types of things. So I don't begrudge anybody who, because of their belief in faith, is living a better life and happier and making good decisions like that one, even if they made that good decision for a reason that at its root was wrong. What I'm arguing is that that's not really stable, and also that it has the side effect of it not being always possible to understand when
or translate or communicate
when it did get something wrong, right? So like it kind of package deals all these things together, and I would hope that we could agree that there are certain things that certain religions advocate for that people follow on faith and are bad for them. Yeah. We could look at, to take an extreme example, like Mayan human sacrifice, like, or something, yeah. Right? Like that's, that would be an example of that's bad. So, I mean, in terms of a process, like, in terms of the rational reconstruction process, like, something Rand tried to do that I actually would criticize her for is that we can just kind of start from zero and, like, totally tabula rasa, knowing nothing about the world. We can go from 0 to 100 in generating this worldview that's going to work. It's maybe technically possible, but I don't think any real human being in the world can, like, do it.
AI might be able to in a year or two, right? So
who?
AI?
Oh man, that's a difficult one. I'm not prepared for that question. Maybe it's possible. I don't know. But let's take as aside that it's, like, possible, maybe, but it's really hard to do, and it's probably not going to be done successfully by AI or humans. So we can talk more in terms of, like, in libertarian language, a Hayekian evolution. F.A. Hayek would talk of capitalism in terms of, this is a system that sort of came about, like, through human processes, and we watch it and we know that it works. No one human being, like, necessarily fully designed it, but now that we've seen it and we know it works, we want to understand why it works and maintain that, right? So I think we can talk about religion and what will or should come next in those sort of same terms, where, like, it's so long ago in history that we don't know who or how it was exactly designed. I obviously do not believe that God designed it. I believe it was designed by people, but it's evolved over time. There's certain things that if we look at societies that were driven by religion, that they've done really well. This evolved naturally, right? And we want sort of that next stage to go naturally, like, as well, as much as it can. So we need to rationally understand, we need to rationally conserve, and I think part of rationally conserving the really important value structures that were embedded within religion and practice structures, like you're talking about, we kind of have to try at least to understand them and try to protect them on different grounding, because
what's that grounding then? Where is that? Where do you put your foot?
So I think that there's a lot of different ways to do it. Again, while I have some criticisms, I do really think Rand did a very good job on a lot of things. Rand would certainly, I don't want to misrepresent, by the way. I just want to be clear that, Rand was very much opposed to religion and religious morality. However, there were certain things about, I think, authority, like you're talking about, hierarchy, certain personal values that there is more overlap than she might have granted. And she did sort of try to reconstruct that, not sort of, exactly try to construct those on rational grounding. So, I mean, I would highly encourage people to read her essay, The Objectivist Ethics, which I don't think is perfectly correct, but I think is close in a lot of ways, as a
Could you give me a hint of this grounding though? Like, what is the primary conception? What is man? And what is life? Like where does it start? Where does this story start? This post-religious value system. Where does it start?
Yeah, so I mean, Rand would argue, and I agree with this much. This is the topic of that essay I was just talking about, the objectivist ethics. Man is a rational animal in the sense of that what differs us from other biological entities is our cognitive ability and ability to try to understand and then make choices based on those understandings. And, if we choose to live, right, then that implies doing certain things to properly protect our life, which is that it is moral to try to rationally understand the world so that we can make correct choices that enable our life and flourishing within it. And a rational look at the world entails our choosing to adopt certain moral beliefs about how we interact with other people to have a functioning society where we're all cooperating and supporting each other. And, if we don't choose those moral values, then what we have is a society that just, falls apart and degrades and people can't survive and we die. So I think that's one possible grounding, something exactly that or similar to that. I think another possible grounding which is similar to that, is a biological understanding of evolution and the values that human societies have evolved to flourish and to replicate. So I think,
yeast replicates. Like, there's I don't see any like moral value in something flourishing or not flourishing in and of itself. Propaganda.
Okay, well, I would argue that yeast has different moral values than humans do. Different species will have different moral values than humans do, based on the fact that we have a different nature than those species.
So we do have a nature, and you're saying that our nature is good somehow?
I'm saying that our nature is. Okay. I mean, it's good insofar as we want to live and flourish, and given that we choose that, then to flourish, we're going to pick all sorts of secondary values. I mean, some people are suicidal. When people are suicidal, I think we want to help them understand, that life is worth living and can be a good place and come to this understanding. But once somebody has this understanding, it entails all sorts of secondary moral values to succeed at doing that thing that we want. I mean, if you want some sort of like, this is a base fact of existence at the level that atoms are a base fact of existence, I'm not, I guess, a moral realist in like that degree of sense. But, I would also argue, I've got a microphone here. A microphone doesn't exist at the level of atoms. But, once we layer on enough on top of that, it starts to exist. And I think it's the same with moral facts. Once reality levels up to us having a certain nature, that nature is going to entail certain moral facts.
Mm-hmm. So how do you get to something like the Ten Commandments? If you cut off the head, if you cut off the God part, and then you cut off the speech code, and then you cut off, I guess, what's the third one? Like, honor
you have to do it. You're having to do a lot of.
Do you, like, how do you get to
sometimes
adultery? Is that really necessary? Like, isn't like a side chick kind of okay? Like, and who are you to tell me not to have a side chick? No,
I don't believe that, but I do believe that sometimes you shouldn't honor your mother and father. I mean, sometimes people have abusive parents, and that's a bad thing to do. Sometimes people have, even if they're not abusive to them, criminal parents who are causing harm to other people, and you shouldn't be honoring those. So I wouldn't argue that the Ten Commandments are some perfect derivation of morality. But yes, there's a lot of clearly good ones there. Clearly, most of the time, you should honor your mother and father also. But you shouldn't murder. I think coveting is, psychologically, harmful as well. I think that's a really good moral lesson, not to do that. How do you get to those? Honoring your mother and father and coveting, and murder. These are all, like, if you just look at a society that's functioning where, people are happy, I don't think it's a ton of work to realize, that not doing those things are bad ideas. I don't think we really needed that, like, handed down in some religious text that we've all been following for thousands of years to figure that out. The coveting one is maybe a little bit harder. That one's harder. And so that's a wonderful insight, but there's all sorts of insights and just moral knowledge that we have, just merely from intuition. And then once somebody has it through intuition, they can understand their intuitions rationally and then pass on their intuitions to others through that rational description. So, do you not murder, because that came from the Ten Commandments, or do you not murder because you have an intuition, even if you've never been exposed to religion, that this is wrong? Right? And if most of us has that intuition, if we evolved those intuitions because they're beneficial, then we can codify them and we can build societies that respect them without any need for supernaturalism.
I don't know about that, but that's a good argument. But I do have a problem with, like, where does this intuition come from? Like, you're saying it's like this God that we all have. Like, there's some sort of, like, spiritual essence that just tells us that this is right and this is wrong. Like, where we know that murder is actually a good in certain circumstances, or is lifted up, and your society, your family, yourself won't exist in certain respects if you do not murder, right? So there is, like, where does that intuition come from? And I don't see it. Like, I've worked with children for many years. Like, you instill values into them. The kid just doesn't think about other people. It thinks about itself. And so you walk it through the steps of understanding theory of mind, and then you imbue the child, she or him, with with a moral compass. Like, you have to imprint that. It doesn't just come out of nowhere, and you do that through authority. So basically, as a preschool teacher, I am the Lord your God, and you shall not use that shovel to bash in the head of your classmate, period. Right? And then as the kid develops, like, then they have that moral intuition already in them. So I think it's kind of tricky. Have you ever read How Dawkins Got Pwned by Curtis Yarvin?
Yes.
So he makes a really good case that atheism is just basically Christianity, just stripped of different words, like, just stripped of the different God talk. But it's still the same religion, right? I was actually reading
that a little bit before we got on to remind myself of it, because I thought you might mention that. My issue, I think there's a number of logical fallacies that he makes in coming to his ultimate conclusion. I think the biggest one is that his understanding of universalism is not really a concept that,
exists in the real world.
Certainly Dawkins, is advocating. So I think that kind of makes it all fall apart. But also, what I'm arguing, interesting for his thing, is that, he sort of defines, a Dawkins-style atheism as a successor meme to religion, right? Where it is the values of Christian society stripped of one certain supernatural belief, and I actually, in a lot of ways, am arguing for that. I think that he feels that, like I think you feel, that the old meme, the traditional religions, if people just choose to adopt them, they can be a successful vehicle. And so the new vehicle is, harmful. The new meme that, strips it loses certain constraints, and, it causes a bunch of problems and that sort of thing.
Well, in the very least, we see with the rise of so-called wokeness, it doesn't address certain needs in humanity. Like the stripping life of enchantment creates more monsters than it dispels in a certain way.
Yeah, I don't think that's exactly his argument, but I think I'm just saying, be really careful if it's not replaced by something successful.
Yeah. So how do you? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, but I think like my argument is that people aren't choosing the old meme in the same way that they used to. So if you want to protect the things that were actually good about the old meme, not the universalism that he's talking about and that I don't think is really believed by many people, if anyone, then you need this new meme to actually go on, because the old meme has decayed and, isn't, so, it's a gene that isn't able to replicate anymore. So we need a new gene that protects the same utility.
You're one
that's my response to how Dawkins got pawned. I'm sorry, I forget the rest of your question.
No, well, thank you. I'm not laying this out in a very rational way. I'm just kind of jumping around, which is my brain style. But I'm trying to understand you, so I'm keep on going back and trying to understand your position. So from your position, from your articles that you wrote, or the tweets that you wrote, that the right wing needs to make space for secularism, for atheists, let's say. What does what do you have to bring to the right wing? How do you help the right wing win? Like what is it galvanizing about secularized hierarchy and value structures that will help the right be more efficient in forestalling the left or whatever, or to implement its will as hierarchies and values and stuff like that. So how do you make it more efficient?
Numbers. So I mean, if the like
arithmetic
goal,
numbers or imaginary numbers, invisible
numbers?
Numbers?
Like people, like masses of people that particularly in a democratic society.
Multitudes.
And
Okay. Right.
Yeah, I'm not an advocate of democracy, to be clear, but I'm an advocate of individual rights. But nonetheless, that's the society that we're in, and also even in a non-democratic society, you need masses of people to institute just structures and things. To usher in or maintain, this system, you need all of those people. If you have declining demographics and just declining numbers of people who are believing in these religions, the left is going to start winning at every election. The woke are going to start dominating this country. And it's going to be a terrible place that I certainly won't want to live in. That will become some form of neo-communism that, is horrible to me. I mean, the horrors of the Soviet Union here. And, if all I'm sort of proposing is, religious people of the right, I think you've gotten 90+% of what you have to say correct. There are certainly certain policy things I disagree with the religious right on, and have always, gay marriage and things like that. But if they have so much right, the importance of the family, the importance of individual rights and natural rights,
responsibility, self-control,
responsibility, community bonding, all this sort of stuff. And all I'm saying is to keep that all around, we just have to start pushing more an argument that doesn't start with and rely on to have all of this. You need to believe in God and turn yourself over to this whole belief system based on certain claims of fact.
Yeah.
I mean, that's it. Well, we're numbers to bring that into reality, and we just disagree about that one thing. And we don't want to, or at least I don't want to, tell religious people who aren't harming anybody else with their religion, you can't have that, right? I want to live in peace and join into a coalitionary movement with those people. Obviously, I have a lot of disagreements with the fundamentals of their belief, and I've gotten a lot of criticism and anger from people who feel that I'm attacking their beliefs, and in a sense that I am, right, because I'm saying that it's not true. But what I'm not attacking is their right to believe those things, and nor the benefits that they believe that it has brought to them personally. I respect that very, very, very deeply, and that's why I want more atheists to see why all of that is so good. Okay. And if it's not being communicated to them well, they're not going to see it, and they're just going to become woke because they're not being presented a positive, good alternative that's defended on grounds, again, that at least appear rational. So on the one hand, I think it's really beneficial for the world and for many atheists to be presented with a value structure and meaning-making system that will improve their lives. But it's also beneficial for the right as a political coalition that wants to maintain a society grounded in all of those things, to have the numbers to not fall to woke socialism.
Mm-hmm. There's this really crotchety guy on the internet. His name's Charles Haywood. He does the Woodhouse podcast. He's got this podcast where he just reviews books. And it's a great podcast, and they're really short. They're like 20 minutes things. He's got a lot of, again, he's really crotchety. He's right-wing and stuff. He's got some kooky ideas. But one thing he says is that the left has this transcendental value set of changing the world, of doing good, of being on the right side of history. It's very intoxicating. It offers a lot of meaning in that sense. The right doesn't have that and the right doesn't get the same amount of political fervor because the goods themselves are not political. Family is not political. A good life is not necessarily political. The left sells political meaning. The right does not sell political meaning. It sells something that's apolitical.
I disagree with this. Religion has historically always been political.
I was talking about the right-wing values, you get so much. I'm just trying to articulate. You get so much meaning out of your family that you don't spend your life, trying to change the world, right? Whereas the left doesn't have. The left has all this other political power, political energy, because it's selling this transcendental good, and the right does have that transcendental good, and it's called God, not politics, not history. It's called God. So I'm just wondering, like, how do you inspire? How do you make it enchanting to the atheist who's believes in rationality utmost, but still won't be activated without a little bit of the magic, without a little bit of the something good, something attractive about the right for atheists? Right.
So I think you're correct, and I used the word earlier, but I didn't define it, that we need meaning-making systems, right? Mm-hmm. Religion is a meaning-making system in that it imbues people with that sense of purpose. Mm-hmm. And the communism and wokeness are meaning-making systems in that they provide people with a sense of purpose, that we're saving people, right? Now, your description of the religious right, that it's somehow like absent from politics because it's like focused on one's life in the family. I don't know that that's always true. It's true sometimes. It's definitely not always true. I mean, if we look at medieval Christian Europe, if we look at Islamic theocracies, if we look kind of all over the world, especially historically, I mean, it changed with classical liberalism, right? Which is, fairly recent and what I advocate for. And, I'm glad that, there's so many Christian classical liberals in the West. It's, that's what has made the West great is classical liberalism, I think. okay, so we need to provide people with meaning. I think that meaning can come from, and I've spent my career, advocating for libertarianism and treating people with dignity as individuals to pursue their own rights. Insofar as the leftist political movements, offer that we're going to make society so much better and, save all of these people, I think we can say that all of these views on the importance of the family and the importance of community and the importance of all these things, like all of these sort of structures are going to make the world such a massively better place to live for people, right? And if we care about saving people, then we should, care about these values. So, in a sense, I feel like there's almost even like a left-wing pitch for right-wing values, kind of. Left-wing in this case. Sorry. My Siri started talking to me. So not left-wing in the sense that, hierarchies, like I've defined it, being anti-hierarchy, but left-wing in more of a sense of just being focused kind of like on empathy and that really being like a driving factor. Yeah. I think that these values really help people live better lives, and to be able to talk about that completely divorced. I mean, Christian people do talk about that all the time, right? I mean, I think you've kind of talked about it here, in the sense of like, well, there's all these benefits from having these beliefs, right? And so, if we can, I do think that's a strong argument. I think those benefits are the strongest argument for religion that exists. I believe that they're very real. So let's talk about those benefits, but just not ask people to have to cross this huge burden of blind faith to accept those really powerful and positive. And
from your perception, the right is hobbled by people having purity tests with regard to deism on one level or another. You see that as a stumbling block to opening up the right?
Yes, I think so.
Okay. And it can if it went easier on that, you think that it would make it more apparent what it's offering beyond that belief system, beyond that code of belief.
Yes. I think that's exactly what I'm advocating.
Okay. All right. And you said these belief systems, like, or meaning-making systems of meaning. What's your Randian? She set up some mind toys for you. That's where you're at. Like, that's how you're.
I'm not perfect. I'm not perfectly a Randian, but I'm
not looking for your label. I don't mean to label you. I'm just like, what is the cool thing that you do to make your life meaningful?
So, I meditate, which is not a Randian thing. I do try to make contact with the grounds of experience as much as possible, which I do through meditation. As I alluded to, I've used psychedelics, I think, to great personal benefit. So I think there's that. I think that helps you make a sense of connection with just like the importance of spreading like joy and connection. I think that it's been encoded into religions as we get purpose from helping other people find God, but to take God out of that is to say, I think we find purpose through helping other people find purpose. Happiness, maybe even enlightenment in like some sort of sense, because that doesn't require faith in a deity or any particular fact claims in that sense, but like by finding like a stable joy in existence and connection and community with others and with the world around us and with nature, I find that really meaning. I think there are big questions still to what existence is. I mean, atheists will frequently talk about, the Big Bang and stuff like that having great spiritual value. That sense of like wonder is really significant. And I feel the same way. I am an atheist towards all of these religions that have encoded specific things in their texts, which I can't believe in. But I'm not necessarily a materialist per se. Like, I don't know what this is. I don't know what we're experiencing right now. I certainly don't know everything about it, right? There are certain things I do know. I know that this exists, that I can feel it. There's facts that I can know about it, but there's so much that I don't. And I think that pursuit, that religion, was for so long sort of the only way in society to meaningfully pursue, of trying to figure out what this is. And we don't all know our purpose. We can just say that, our purpose is God because that's easy. But that sense of trying to find purpose and try to figure out what it is I think very, very, very meaningful.
Speaking of purpose, what's up for you in the coming months? Do you have a big project on the horizon?
Not about atheism. I think I'll probably put this topic down for a little bit, although this has been a lot of fun. I think I've basically made my point about it. I may have more to say in the future, but, like I said at the beginning, my day job is I work at the Foundation Against Intolerance and Racism. I'm really, really passionate about the work that I'm doing there and, pushing back on critical social justice. And I should say, I'm talking about what the right wing should do. FAIR is not a right-wing organization per se. It's a single-issue organization that is a coalition of people with many different political beliefs, but who all believe, that we should treat people as individuals without regard to their immutable characteristics, and not be defined by the identity categories that the woke would say, or critical social justice people would say they should be identified as. So I'm really passionate about that cause and working on that. And I have a book called Redefining Racism, How Racism Became Power Plus Prejudice, which tracks the efforts of activists to redefine the word racism from its traditional meaning of prejudice or discrimination based on race to power plus prejudice, which carries a lot of damaging baggage with it. And so I did a whole investigation into the history of that. I have a book, and hopefully that should be coming out very soon.
Okay, so that's on the horizon. Cool. Is there like a good racism? You found like the good racism, or is it just like there's just different shades of bad racism?
A good definition of racism. All racism is bad. Okay. The good definition is prejudice or discrimination based on race. Like, we should not treat people with regard to these categories. We should be colorblind effectively in terms of, how we treat people. That was what I think Martin Luther King was talking about when he talked about, racism being bad. But now, well, it's okay to treat people with prejudice based on race. It's okay to discriminate, to have,
it's corrective.
We're in graduation season right now. There's stories all the time about, segregated college graduations and stuff, Yeah. So wonderful. I think any definition of racism that says that that's okay is horrible.
It's wrong. It's off base.
Yeah. Sorry.
No, that's okay. So how do people contact you, and what's kind of like your digs where people see your updates and maybe your movies, your films, and all this other stuff that you do?
Find me on Twitter at Joseph J. Klein.
All right. Oh, that's your warehouse. That's your where you are.
I need to build a website pretty bad, but I don't have it yet. So for now, for now, that's what I have.
Twitter's good enough. That's what I live on. So thank you
Oh,
very
and
much.
I should just mention, follow Atheists for Liberty also, because I'm doing this, talking about this issue on their behalf. I will,
Yes.
even if I'm not writing more on this, I will be their state director for Virginia. So especially reach out to me if you're in the state of Virginia and you want to get involved.
Okay, cool. Yeah, that'll all be linked in the description. Thanks for venturing into this topic. It's been a long time since I talked about atheism, and it's kind of refreshing in a sense to kind of step out and try to figure out these big questions, even though it's kind of like you think atheism is about not believing, but it's about questioning. When it gets down to it, it's like a lot about questioning, which is fun.
Yeah, these were really challenging questions, and I really appreciated this conversation and being confronted with all of that. So thank you very much.
Good show. All right, let's stop and stop.
So I have a little bit of bad news.